If you're waiting to feel like a profitable trader, you're going to wait forever. Because that feeling doesn't exist. Nobody wakes up one day with a trumpet fanfare and a certificate. Profitability doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in through 5 small, unglamorous changes that most traders don't even notice happening to them. And today I'm going to show you exactly what those 5 signs look like from the inside, because I promise you, they're not what you think. Here's the problem with almost every video on this topic. They'll tell you the sign of a profitable trader is a growing account balance. Green months, a rising equity curve on a screen recording set to inspirational music. That's not a sign of becoming profitable. That's the result, months or years after the actual shift already happened. If you're waiting for the balance to tell you you've arrived, you're reading the thermometer instead of noticing the weather changed. The real signs show up earlier, quieter, and most of them don't feel like progress at all. Some of them feel like losing your edge. That's exactly why almost nobody recognizes them in themselves. So let's talk about 2 traders, because you need to see this contrast before the list will mean anything. Priya spent 4 years as a pharmacist before she started trading. Meticulous person. The kind of person who reads the entire label before taking an aspirin. When she got into trading, she treated it like a subject to master through sheer information volume. She had 18 tabs bookmarked for daily reading. She joined 4 Discord servers. She could tell you the correlation between the 10-year yield and semiconductor stocks off the top of her head. Genuinely impressive person, genuinely hardworking. And for 3 straight years, she was flat, not blown up. Just flat, quarter after quarter, slightly up, slightly down, netting out to almost nothing after fees. Danny used to install commercial HVAC systems. No finance background at all. When he started trading, people who met him assumed he wouldn't last 6 months because he couldn't explain a single macroeconomic concept if you asked him to. What he could do was follow 11 rules exactly every single day without deviation for 2 years straight before he ever posted a single result publicly. He wasn't tracking correlation coefficients. He was tracking whether he did the same 4 things yesterday that he did today. Priya is still flat. Danny has been quietly, boringly profitable for 3 years now, and the difference between them was never information. Priya knows more about markets than Danny will ever know. The difference was that Danny started showing the 5 signs I'm about to describe somewhere around month 8, and Priya, as far as I can tell, still hasn't shown a single one of them. 3 years in, not because she's not smart enough, because nobody ever told her what to actually look for in herself, so she kept optimizing the wrong thing. Let's get into the 5 signs. And I want to warn you up front. Several of these are going to sound like the opposite of what you'd expect. That's the point. Sign 1 is that your trades have gotten boring to talk about. Early on, every trader has a war story. The one that went against them for an hour before it finally worked. The one where they doubled down and it paid off. The one where they held through pain and got rewarded, and now it's a personal legend they tell at every opportunity. These stories feel like proof of skill. They're actually the opposite. A trade worth telling a story about is usually a trade where something went wrong with your process and you got lucky on the outcome. Danny cannot tell you a single memorable trade from the last 8 months. Not because nothing happened, trades happened every week, but because they all looked the same. Enter here, risk this much, exit at one of 2 predetermined points, log it, move on. When I asked him for his best trade story recently, he genuinely struggled to think of one and then apologized like it was a personal failing that he didn't have a bid story. It isn't. It's the actual evidence. If your trades have started to feel like doing laundry, repetitive, unremarkable, slightly tedious, that's not you losing your edge. That's your edge finally working the way it was designed to. Priya, on the other hand, has a story for almost every position she's held longer than a day. Great stories. Genuinely entertaining to listen to. Every one of them is also, without exception, a story about a moment where the plan and the actual decision diverged. Sign 2 is that you've started being disappointed by wins. This one sounds insane the first time you hear it, so let me explain it properly. A trader early in their development judges every trade by its outcome. Won money? Good trade. Lost money? Bad trade. A trader who's actually becoming profitable starts judging trades by process, regardless of outcome. And this creates a strange, uncomfortable new experience. Winning a trade you shouldn't have won. You broke your position sizing rule, sized in too big, because it felt like a sure thing. And it worked out, and instead of celebrating, you feel a small twist of unease. That unease is data. It means the part of your brain responsible for long-term survival is starting to outvote the part of your brain that only cares about today's dopamine. Danny described this to me almost apologetically, like he thought something was wrong with him. He'd oversized a position against his own rule, out of impatience, and it worked. And he said the win felt worse than most of his losses that month, because he knew exactly what he'd gotten away with, and knew the sample size where it doesn't work is much bigger than the one lucky instance in front of him. Priya has never once described disappointment at a winning trade. Every win to her is unambiguously good news, evaluated entirely on its own, disconnected from the 100 trades around it. That's not a character flaw, it's just an earlier stage of development than the one Danny's in, and there's no shame in it. But it does mean the shift hasn't happened yet. Sign 3 is that your position sizing has gotten smaller as your confidence has gotten higher. This is maybe the most counterintuitive one on the list because it inverts almost everything the industry sells you. The dominant story in trading content is that as you improve, you size up, because bigger conviction should mean bigger bets. In practice, the traders who are actually becoming durable tend to do the reverse. As they get better at recognizing their own edge, they get more precise about how rare a truly high-quality setup actually is, and more honest about how often they used to convince themselves an average setup was a great one. Danny's position size today is smaller, as a percentage of his account, than it was in his second year, even though his account has grown and his win rate has improved. He explained it simply: the better he got at spotting his actual edge, the more he realized how many of his old great setups were really just average setups wearing conviction as a costume. Shrinking his size wasn't caution replacing confidence. It was honesty replacing self-deception. Priya's position sizing has stayed roughly the same for 3 years, mostly determined in the moment by how strongly she feels about a given trade. Some trades get double the size of others based purely on gut certainty. That gut certainty has never once, in 3 years of data, correlated with actual outcome. She just hasn't checked, because checking would mean confronting how unreliable the feeling actually is. Sign 4 is that you've stopped needing to watch the trade after you take it. Early on, a live trade is a live event. You watch every tick. You refresh constantly. Some part of you believes that watching harder somehow influences the outcome, the way people press the elevator button repeatedly even though it does nothing. As the shift happens, something strange occurs. You place the trade, set the orders, and close the window. Not out of avoidance, out of genuine indifference to the outcome of any single trade, because your confidence has moved from will this specific trade work to will my process work across the next 100 trades. And a single trade stops being emotionally significant enough to watch. Danny told me the actual marker for him wasn't a big win. It was the day he placed a trade, went to fix a leaking pipe under his sink, and forgot the trade was open for 40 minutes. Not because he was distracted or careless, because his orders were already set to handle every outcome without him, and some part of his brain had finally accepted that his presence wasn't required for the trade to be handled correctly. Priya checks her open positions on average, by her own admission, every 6 to 8 minutes during market hours. Every check is a tiny hit of anxiety, followed by a tiny hit of relief or dread, repeated dozens of times a day. That's not diligence. That's a nervous system that hasn't yet been convinced the plan can survive without supervision. Sign 5, and this is the one that ties the other 4 together. You've started treating a losing streak as neutral information instead of as a verdict on your competence. This is the deepest one, because it's not really about trading at all. It's about whether your sense of self-worth has been surgically detached from your P&L. A trader early in the process has a losing week and spirals into some version of, maybe I'm not built for this, or maybe the market's rigged, or maybe I need a completely new strategy. A trader who's actually becoming profitable has a losing week and thinks almost nothing. Because a losing week inside a sound process was already expected, priced in, budgeted for, months ago. Danny had a 4-trade losing streak 2 months ago, his worst stretch in over a year. I asked him how it felt. He said, honestly, mostly boring. He knew the math of his system meant streaks like that would happen a handful of times a year, and this was simply one of them arriving on schedule, no spiral, no system rewrite. No 2 a.m. search for a new strategy. Just the 5th losing trade logged the same way as the first winning one, in the same flat tone, in the same spreadsheet. Priya's worst stretch this year, by contrast, produced 3 different strategy adjustments in a single month, each one a reaction to a losing week rather than evidence gathered over a real sample. Every bad stretch becomes proof the current approach is broken. So the approach keeps changing, which means she never accumulates enough repetitions of any single method to actually know if it works. She's not undisciplined. She's actually being extremely diligent about the wrong problem. It's worth pausing on that phrase because it applies to more than just Priya. A losing streak inside a sound process is not a message. It's not the market trying to tell you something. It's a mathematical certainty that was baked into the strategy from day one. The same way a coin that lands heads 60% of the time will still occasionally land tails 5 times in a row, and that streak, when it happens, says nothing about whether the coin is fair. Danny understood this at a gut level without ever needing the coin metaphor explained to him. Priya, despite understanding probability better than most professional traders, still experiences every losing streak as personally addressed to her, which tells you something important. Knowing a concept intellectually and actually believing it in your nervous system are 2 completely different achievements, and only the second one shows up as sign 5. Now, here's what actually connects all 5 of these signs, and it's the part most people miss because they're looking at each one separately, like a checklist to tick off. Every single one of these signs is really the same underlying shift, viewed from 5 different angles. It's the shift from needing each individual trade to mean something, to trusting a process across a large number of trades where any single one means almost nothing. Boring trade stories, disappointment at undeserved wins, shrinking size with rising skill, indifference to a live position, neutrality toward losing streaks. None of these are 5 separate skills you develop one at a time. They're 5 symptoms of the same internal event. Your identity quietly detaching itself from any individual outcome. This is why the signs don't feel like winning. They feel like losing something. Losing the excitement, losing the drama, losing the war stories, losing the sense that any of this is special. Because it is losing something. It's losing the version of yourself that needed trading to be meaningful in the moment. What replaces it is quieter and, frankly, much less fun to talk about at a dinner party. But it's the only version of this that survives past year 2. I want to be honest with you about something because it matters more than any of the 5 signs individually. None of this happens because you decide, in a single moment of clarity, to change your relationship with outcomes. It happens the way Danny described it. Slowly, almost without noticing, over hundreds of repetitions of the same boring behavior, until one day you look back and realize the panic simply isn't there anymore. The way you might realize one day that a fear you used to have has quietly disappeared without a specific moment where it left. You can't force these 5 signs to appear by trying to act calm. You can only create the conditions, small size, fixed rules, long enough sample sizes, that let them show up on their own timeline, which is almost always slower than you want it to be. There's a reason these signs take so long to arrive, and it's worth naming directly, because it explains why some traders show all 5 within 18 months, and others, like Priya, can go 3 years without a single one. Every one of these 5 signs requires you to give up something that feels protective in the short term. Boring trade stories mean giving up the identity of being someone with a dramatic story to tell. Discomfort at undeserved wins means giving up the simple pleasure of just being happy when you make money. Smaller size with rising skill means giving up the story that conviction should be rewarded with bigger bets. Forgetting about a live trade means giving up the illusion that watching harder helps. And neutrality toward a losing streak means giving up the option to blame the market, the algorithms, the news, or bad luck, and accepting instead that the losing streak was already part of the deal you signed up for. Every one of those is a small loss before it's a gain. This is exactly why the traders who get there fastest are rarely the smartest people in the room. Intelligence, if anything, can slow this down. Because a sharp mind is very good at constructing sophisticated reasons why this particular losing streak really is different, why this particular oversized position really was justified, why this specific war story really does prove something. Danny didn't have the vocabulary to build those justifications. He just had 11 rules and the willingness to repeat them without commentary. Priya has an analytical mind capable of building a compelling case for almost any deviation. And that skill, which serves her well in every other part of her life, works directly against her here. There's also a practical reason so few people ever notice these signs in themselves, and it has to do with what gets rewarded with attention in this space. A dramatic trade story gets watched. A humble brag about a big win gets engagement. A confident call sized up big and posted publicly gets shares. Nobody makes a video about the trade that was so unremarkable the trader forgot it happened. Nobody claps for the loss that felt like nothing because it was already expected. The entire attention economy around trading content is built to reward the exact behaviors these 5 signs are moving you away from. Which means the healthier you get, the less interesting you become to watch. And the less validation you get from the outside for the progress you're actually making. You have to learn to source that validation from your own spreadsheet instead of from anyone's applause, because the applause was never going to show up for this particular kind of progress. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it might be the single biggest reason traders stall out for years despite doing real work. If the only feedback you're getting is external, views, comments, a sense of being impressive to people watching, you will unconsciously drift back toward behaviors that produce a good story, because those are the behaviors that get rewarded in the moment. The traders who actually make it through tend to build their own private feedback loop instead. A journal, a spreadsheet, a simple log that only they read, where the only question that matters is whether the process was followed, not whether anyone found it interesting. Danny's spreadsheet has never been shown to another human being. That's not secrecy. That's the entire mechanism working exactly as intended. So let's go back to where we started, because you deserve an honest update, not a tidy bow. Danny is still trading the same 11 rules 3 years in, with a slightly smaller position size than he used 2 years ago and a slightly larger account than he had then. Nothing dramatic happened to him. No single insight changed everything overnight. What happened is that he kept showing up to the same boring process for long enough that the 5 signs arrived one at a time, quietly, without him announcing any of them, the way you don't announce that you've gotten used to a new commute. Priya is still trading too, and she'll likely tell you, if you ask her directly, that she's learned more about market structure in the last 3 years than most professionals ever will. That's probably true. It's also, in this specific context, almost beside the point. She hasn't been flat because she lacks information. She's been flat because information was never the actual constraint, and nobody around her, including for a long time herself, ever pointed that out clearly enough for her to hear it. So here's what I'd ask you to do with the rest of this week. Instead of asking whether your account balance has grown, ask whether your trade stories have gotten boring. Ask whether a recent lucky win left you a little uneasy instead of triumphant. Ask whether your size has been shrinking as your read on the market has improved, or growing because your confidence has been rising along with it. Ask whether you can place a trade and genuinely forget about it for a while. And ask whether your last losing streak felt like information or felt like a verdict on who you are. You won't get 5 yeses this month, and that's fine. Most people who eventually get there don't get all 5 within the same year. But if you can honestly find even one of these signs starting to show up in your own behavior, quietly, without you trying to force it, that's worth more than any green month you've had so far, because green months come and go for reasons that have nothing to do with skill. These 5 signs don't. They only show up once something real has actually changed underneath the surface, whether the account balance has caught up to it yet or not. The account balance is always the last thing to update.